The three groups actually did talk about an important facet of masculinity making. And you would think, given that what I've already shared with you relative to my own family history, that I would have kind of been clued in, you know. And in fact, the feminist family therapy theories articulated for any model of masculinity to have credence, it's got to be able to explain the penchant for violence directed against other men as well as women and children. So I developed, based on some of the interview material, this notion of the mystery of masculinity. And I wish I could say that I came up with that term, but I didn't. I borrowed it from, oh, what is her name? She wrote Slow Change. I'm drawing a blank. Oh well. But it's not my own. All right, so I want to read another excerpt. This is going to give you just a mental picture of kind of the what I will call the psychological world that goes on. And actually, you ladies experience the same thing, but the argument here is that this becomes a part of the masculine definition or self-definition, how well we do this, all right? So, this is a 55-year-old white painter. Okay, his name's John. Oh, my dad had a temper, and when he went off on you, we kids skedaddled every which way to avoid getting hit. And just when you knew there was no place to run, you would drop to the floor and curl up in the smallest ball you could. That way, when he hit you with the strap or cord, or whatever he was hitting you with, you could take the blows. Now, you're hearing about the violence piece, but I want you to imagine the picture. This little boy running away, he drops and he curls. He tries to make himself as small as he can. And I remember when this dawned on me, I was actually at a, I really believe this was the Lord giving me that little bit of insight. I was at a high school play. Woodland Hills was doing Jesus Christ Superstar. And I was watching the scene in the play where everybody's coming at Jesus. You know, heal me, heal me, heal me. And he goes, go heal yourself. Remember? And they're all coming at him. And you could just see him kind of in, at least in the play, regardless of the, you know, the veracity of it. It just hit me. And I remembered this excerpt, thinking about it. Each of the three groups, the Amish, the black working class, the white working class, told stories relative to violence. Experiences that they had from fathers, people in their family, kids in the neighborhood, in which they were beaten. Right? Now it's interesting, none of the men ever referred to themselves as a perpetrator, and I'm going to use that term loosely. They were never the one to give the blow, although my guess is going to be, in those 30 interviews, there had to be a few folks that did that same thing, since it had been something that was layered into them. But it got me thinking about this notion of toughening, right? This way that we go. Now let's take it to the extreme out of this, and let's go to Hollywood for a second. Do you remember the movie Full Metal Jacket? You remember the movie? Do you remember the scene? It's a movie about guys going to boot camp for Vietnam. And there's one particular section in the movie where kind of the chubby kid is targeted by the drill instructor. And this guy just rides him. And in the beginning, the guy seemed like a pretty regular fella. But gradually, you could just see the transformation take place in this guy. And the way the movie plays out, the private ends up shooting the drill instructor, kills the drill instructor. And the idea here, to use that movie presentation, is that there is this kind of patterning that goes on, toughening of boys. Violence isn't necessarily always used, but there is this message that is given that you've got to be strong, you have to be able to hold up under whatever it is that is put out there toward you. So I've been steeped in all this psychoanalytic literature with Nancy Chodorow, right? And as an aside, I didn't find support for her theory with the Amish, because actually the Amish men didn't have a whole lot to do with the kids until they got to be really like 7, 8 years old. And according to her psychoanalytic literature, that means that they would have missed all the benefit of the affective layering that should have been going on. So by rights, they actually should have been just as relationally deficient. But they weren't. And the argument would be that that process actually goes on much longer than the psychoanalytic literature would have portrayed. So, let me play with this. So I want you to imagine we're going to take you out into space. And they've now kind of think with some degree of certainty that there is such a thing as a black hole. So we're going to use the black hole as a metaphor, right, for the psychological process that goes on with this toughening as boys are taught how to withstand or hold up under whatever it is that life throws at them. And if you know anything about a black hole, it's actually a star, a dense star that's collapsing in on itself, and it gets to a place where light is not able to escape. So think about it for a second. In terms of the process that goes on with boys becoming men, as they're exposed and taught through their families and the significant men in their life about how they're supposed to conduct themselves, what they're to share, what they're not to share, what emotions to reveal, what not to reveal. And the argument would be that they learn this contraction process. Okay, so we're going to talk about ego boundaries. Ego boundaries is a term that psychoanalytic literature uses to talk about this process. It's like an invisible boundary that has the potential to connect us with others on a psychological level, or to create distance or separation with other people. So keep in mind this black hole, right? So the argument would be with little boys that they're taught how to continue to contract that boundary. And the boundary keeps contracting. And they begin to get good at it. You'll see this sometimes with adolescent boys when they all of a sudden have the epiphany that, they'll say, people can't hurt me. I've heard, I don't care. People can't hurt me. They're not going to hurt me. Right? They become almost inebriated with their sense of invincibility. In a way that would kind of describe this notion of contraction. So where the violence comes in is this contraction process continues, and boys are then tempted to actually keep what we would call a heavily contracted ego boundary, right? And so what happens? It gets to a point where light is not able to escape. And what is light? Reflective thought, right? You ever see the light bulb, right? What is that? Oh, an aha moment, right? What is going on inside in terms of being able to reflect on what you're feeling. So an intra-personal awareness, right? We all have this kind of ticker tape that goes on in terms of our thinking, and then the argument would be that there's also this internal feeling state. Many of you ladies are very much aware of that, what you're feeling. If I were to ask most of you what you're feeling at any given moment, you probably could come up with something. But when I have guys come into my office and their wife has brought them in and we turn to them and ask them what they think or what they feel, what do you imagine they say?
Fine.
Who said, I don't know? I don't know. You know, I really don't think we need to be here. This is all in your head. I'm fine. We're fine. All right? So the argument is that this contraction that happens limits the potential for connection on the part of the man with others. Okay. Now I want you to imagine that this, kind of like this black hole, it keeps collapsing in on itself even more, right? The guy is continuing to get better and better at this self-protective mechanism, if you want to call it that. And you've got three different things that are going to happen. Let me see if I can remember them. I take some liberty with these terms. Depersonalization. So this is disassociation, depersonalization, demonization. As the contraction process continues, what happens? The guy begins to disassociate with thoughts and feelings, right? And an awareness of self. You know, in fact, if you think about sports, you know, we're taught, I played a lot of football, we're taught to play through the pain. Don't think about it, push through it, right? Now you ladies are taught to disassociate. Think of the one place that you're taught to disassociate should come to mind. Well, I don't know how many of you have kids. Childbirth, right? You go to those classes, what do they say? You pick a focal point over there, and you look there and do your breathing exercises, and what are you doing? You're disassociating from the pain. Don't call it pain. We're not allowed to call it pain. It's called discomfort. Right? No? I'm teasing. Anyway, but you ladies are taught to do this as well, but you don't define yourself by your capacity to withstand that. You may have some sense of pride that you got through the experience okay or well, but it becomes part of the masculine definition. Well, this is a process, this ego boundary contraction. Next is depersonalization, but this is not depersonalization like the psychologists use it in the DSM-5. This is not where you kind of lose yourself. This is the objectification of people, right? Where you begin to see people as objects to be manipulated and moved around like on a chessboard, right? I keep myself closed off, right? And many of you ladies, I've heard this in my offices, you say in these therapy sessions, you know, when we make love, it doesn't feel like we're being intimate. It feels, notice, I'm not making any eye contact. When we're making love, it feels, I could be the bedpost. I don't feel like you're making love to me, right? Objectification. So, right, the objectification of women. Think about the way women are portrayed in, those ads. Think of pornography, the objectification, right? Okay, and then it goes on, and we get to demonization. And this is the most serious. This is where violence can happen in the depersonalization end, but this is where you assign malicious intent to what you perceive as some sort of threat. And so you'll see, those of you that are going to do any kind of couples work, where the guy will be going along, and all of a sudden he'll be angry. And he'll just look at his wife with just such hate and contempt, right? And what's happening is that he engaged in a certain amount of defensive posturing, but then at a certain point it went pretty quickly to here, and he ends up viewing her as the enemy. Or you think about Gottman's work again with the Four Horsemen and the contempt. He argues that the contempt in the relationship that people have for each other is a high likelihood that there's going to be